r/AskReddit. Redditors who remarried an ex-spouse. Why did you divorce and how did you get back together? My mom and dad married out of high school. When they were 26 they got divorced. They divorced because of the stress of 3 kids. My dad was in the Air Force and was deployed all the time. And while neither parent has confirmed it, but based on some jokes I believe my dad was also unfaithful and in general he was just very immature. My mom left him because in her words she had 3 kids to take care of, grad school to get through, and didn't have time for his bullshit. They both went on to have different relationships and lives. They barely saw each other unless it was to trade us kids off. Then around the time my sister and I started playing sports my dad started to come around more to watch us. We lived about 6 hours away and mom let him stay at the house when needed. He went from sleeping on the couch to her bedroom within a football season. They got married again the next summer after 6-7 years apart. Been together ever since and practically do everything together. Right person, wrong time, I guess. I see mostly tales of marital woe here. I'll offer you a positive rebuttal. My mom and dad split when I was 5 and my sister was 7. They were young with 2 kids and incredibly broke. I don't know the full story or all the details, but I'm sure those things all just caught up to them in the end. It was a really rough divorce, especially for us kids. They were separated for 3 years or so, lived in separate apartments etc. My mom started seeing a new guy, although we never saw my dad with anyone. I'm sure he was seeing people too. Some years passed, their rebounds came and went. They both got stable jobs and started seeing each other more, showing up at Christmas together, attending soccer games together. When I was 9 or so they decided to rent a house. 1 year later they found out they were pregnant with my little sister. They got remarried about a year after my little sister was born. That was 21 years ago. They are sincerely one of the happiest couples I've ever been around. You never would have thunk it 25 years or so ago. Sometimes space and refocus is actually all you need. Happy Christmas. My great aunt and uncle did this. He was still suffering from the trauma of his World War II service with the Marines in the Pacific when she had a stillborn child and was told she'd never have kids. And things just imploded. They got divorced. My aunt traveled to Asia and the Middle East for like 9 months. While for him it was more or less the wake up call that he was starting to learn a ducked up from seeing his buddies get blown up. She came back, and he had completely changed, and they completely reconnected. Keep in mind, this was the 50s, so the thought of a 30-something Marine vet going to therapy and being in touch with his PTSD triggers and shit was pretty ducking life altering. Her next planned trip was Europe and she asked if he wanted to come along and his response was I figured they'd send me there to fight Hitler. But I guess this works too. They called my grandma from Gdansk maybe 2 months later to let them know they had gotten remarried in the church my great grandparents had gotten married in, and were together until Aunt Betty died about 3 years ago. Uncle Frank died a year after her, and used to tell us all the time that he missed his girlfriend. My parents got pregnant in their senior year of high school and married over the summer on my mom's 18th birthday because she wouldn't ask her parents to sign the marriage certificate. My brother was born a few months later and they stuck it out for a year before divorcing. Then my dad got drafted to Vietnam and when he came home 19 months later went straight to my mom to see my brother. They remarried, trying to do the right thing. All they got out of that marriage was me. They divorced a few years later before my first birthday. They've always remained civil, even friendly, but I have no idea how they stayed married as long as they did. They're very different, non-compatible personalities. My mom did this with my now former stepfather. I can say for certain that it was daddy issues. Her father died when she was young, and it left her with an unresolved terror of loneliness and abandonment. So she kept getting sucked back into a toxic relationship wherein both she and I were getting abused. It took her a long time to begin understanding her own root causes. Way too long after the fact. But at least she finally and completely kicked him to the curb. Years ago I saw the country singer/songwriter Billy Joe Shaver introducing a song. He said, "This one I wrote for my wife. I love that woman so much I married her 3 times. He chuckled and said, "Of course I divorced her a couple of times too." I was contracting a couple years ago and my headhunter would take me for lunch every couple months. The last lunch we had together before he went into negotiations for my next contract, he was very sad and depressed. I asked him what was the matter, and he basically just broke down and told me that he was getting a divorce because she was cheating. Being of an advanced age, I had many friends get divorced around that time, so I kinda knew the routine. I talked with him and told him how dudes with good jobs are pretty in demand post 35. He thanked me for listening and really went to bat for me in negotiations and got me the max salary for the contract. I told this story a bunch as an example of being nice to everyone. You never know what could happen. However, I kinda stopped telling this story because my wife and I were out at the movies a year or so later. We see my recruiter and start talking and catching up. Then this woman walks up to him and he introduces her as his wife. I say, "Oh hey, congrats. I'm glad you met someone." He looks at me a little panicked and starts awkwardly explaining that he remarried the same woman. Haven't talked to him since, so I don't know the full story. I just hope he's happy. He was a nice dude. Had a friend once who married her high school sweetheart, then divorced on their 5-year anniversary just so they could get married again. Not me, but this guy who works in one of our rural offices has married and divorced the same woman literally 6 times. I'm not sure what their logic is, but whatever. We never got married, but were together for 7 years. We broke up because I was planning to move out of the country after graduating. Was an older student. I was 29 at that point. We were best friends and stayed best friends throughout it, though. But circumstances made it impossible for me to see the plans through, and I went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and landed in the psych ward like you do. He drove me to intake, stayed during my admitting, and came to see me every single day. He's everything good in this world. Needless to say, we got back together 2 years ago and we're in it to win it. True love isn't what movies and shit make it out to be. True love is bringing someone socks that actually fit their ridiculously tiny feet when they are trapped in the psych ward. This will be a sweeter answer than expected. Not me, but a client of mine was working to get citizenship. They had been married back in their home country and had immigrated to the US. Because they weren't sure if their country's marriage was legally recognized in the US, they decided to get divorced and then remarried in the US. They could have saved the trouble and just asked someone, IDK, a clerk, a lawyer, whatever. I dated my girlfriend for about 5 years before we split up. We had been living together, but her anxiety and my depression led to a pretty terrible situation. After being apart for 1.5 years, we had both worked on our mental health and gotten good jobs. We both realized that we liked just talking to each other more than being with anyone else. We got married in 2017 and are still going strong. I actually have a really heartfelt story about my aunt and uncle. They originally were high school sweethearts, married young, had 2 kids, were together for 25 years. My uncle had a really bad drinking problem, and they were constantly unhappy, so my aunt filed for divorce. My uncle's drinking got worse then, and he basically drank himself to death. He ended up going to the hospital and was really sick. They detoxed him for 2 weeks and he never touched a bottle of alcohol again. He was sober for 2 years and had a stroke. It really ducked him up and he hasn't fully recovered from it. This caused my aunt and uncle to get back together though. After his stroke she would visit him every day in the hospital and eventually had him come back home so she could make sure he was taken care of and safe. He could barely walk, and his swallowing was affected, so there was a high choking risk. He eventually recovered to the point he could take care of himself, but they are still living together and sleep in the same bed again, although they haven't remarried. Not me, but my friend did. They got a divorce when their baby was under a year old. They divorced because my friend lost her job and couldn't find another that paid enough to cover transportation, childcare, and even groceries. They were struggling, but because they didn't meet certain poverty lines they were denied government assistance. When they divorced she said she was a single mother and they did get some assistance. They married again after her child went to school. I have 2 friends whose parents have done this, or at least divorced and got back together even though they didn't remarry. In both cases their moms filed for divorce and made the decision to return when their ex-husband's health was failing. One dad sadly passed away and the other dad is in remission, still with his wife. but doesn't realize the Catholic Church has her listed as a widow. I find some similarities in the two families. Both moms show narcissistic tendencies with favoritism and martyrdom. My husband just reminded me of friends of ours that divorced after raising kids and then recently got back together after divorcing 10 years ago. Raising their kids was super stressful for her because he woke up for work at 2 AM and so after 6 PM she had to keep 4 kids quiet. His chronic lack of sleep meant he was super particular about the tidiness of the house, and by time they got the twins out of the house they had been ready to split for years. 10 years, grandkids, and wisdom later they decided they really did still like each other and that the situation they were in just wasn't ideal. My sister did this. They divorced because he was controlling. Not physically abusive as far as I'm aware. After the divorce he went into counseling and got his shit together. They later remarried 1 or 2 years later. A bit late, but this is the story I got over Christmas. This all happened recently. My stepdad's cousin divorced his wife 10 plus years ago. He has one daughter with his ex. He dated around a bit and finally found someone he liked enough to buy a house with. During the house hunting period, his daughter announces she's pregnant and she's realized she wants a traditional family. So she asks her parents to get back together, meaning her dad would need to bail on his girlfriend, who he was about to purchase a home with. They ducking agreed to it. Her parents said okay. Dad dumped his girlfriend, who is apparently very nice, right before the holidays, and grandma and grandpa to be are now readily available for babysitting duties. It's crazy. Why are half the responses here copies of 1-year-old posts from accounts with no other activity? Did I accidentally step into an industrial karma farm? Are unresolved parental issues the thing that will finally make the computers turn against their human overlords? I lived with a woman for a couple years. Broke up badly. She called me decades later and said I was her best boyfriend ever and wanted to know if I wanted to try again. It lasted a week. Even though it didn't work out, we smoothed things over and still have a friendship. I don't regret any of it. I left my ex when he started doing drugs. I got full custody, it was so bad. He got sober after losing his kids. I got sick. Years later I was so sick I couldn't deal and he let me move in with him. Then I bought a house and he moved in with me. He's 49 and keeps getting hotter and hotter. No grey hair. Sexy dad bod. Dating in your 40s as a female success for your information. Most men are questionable at this point. He's super in love with me and a great provider and dad. I've been fighting it but it's been slowly becoming a thing. My biological parents married and divorced each other twice all before I was 5 years old. They've gone on to marry other PPL. 2 each, but they have been cheating with each other on and off throughout their other marriages. She's got BPD and he's a narcissist. They are a match made in hell and they truly deserve each other. I loved her. She wanted to take the other half of my money through another divorce. My dad was married 4 times, twice each to 2 women. He married his first wife and divorced. He said they married a second time as an excuse to get drunk. Divorced again eventually. No surprise. Married my mom and had me and then divorced when I was 8. She ran up a shit ton of credit card debt and was going to go to jail for lying on the credit card application saying she was married. So my dad married her so they could do a bankruptcy. He also married her, I found out later, because he knew she was a loser and he wasn't going to remarry again, so he wanted her to have his generous pension and social security so she wouldn't be a burden on me after he died. My grandparents did this when I was like 7. They divorced so my grandpa could get with his Filipino girlfriend, which was an obvious scam. Then when he realized it was a bad idea and got remarried. Was the scam that she was really Malaysian? It was a guy named Phil. Dr. Phil opens up on his past. It wasn't gay back then. We had our socks on. I just entered a relationship with the same girl for the 3rd time. First was 30 years ago, then 20 years ago. No contact all for the last 20 years and then she moves in on the same street. Still early but I'll let you know how it turns out. Semicolon. My parents, while never officially divorced, have went through it. They knew each other 2 months and my dad was drafted to join the military. He quickly proposed to and married my mom. A year later here I am. And I cannot tell you the amount of times they split apart growing up. The most recent was a few years ago. where divorce papers were filed and ready to go. No one was happy. They lived apart and we would visit between the two. I have 3 younger siblings. I moved out at 18. They got back together and seemed to be managing. Still not happy. Up until this past year, a lot of bad stuff happened. I had an engagement fall through, and honestly it brought us as a family closer together. Dad lost his job of 23 years and his dad, my grandfather, passed away. My mom and dad grew close and actually fell back in love. Now they are both genuinely happy for the first time I've ever seen. Not at all the same thing, but my wife and I met in middle school, lost our virginities to each other at 14, dated for a year, broke up, did the whole Facebook thing where you say we should totally catch up for a coffee one time and never did. Sort of said that for years. One time we actually did meet up though on a whim. We each had different partners at the time. The attraction was immediate. Been married 8 years. Have 3 kids. Pretty great overall. My great grandmother divorced and remarried my great grandfather 3 times. As far as numbers 2 and 3 go, I'm not certain, although he definitely cheated on her on a number of occasions. So there you go. But I know number 1 because my great grandma wouldn't go down on him like the French girls did. He was in France during World War I. So there you go. They were divorced when he finally croaked. But they were working on getting married again. No doubt they probably would have been doing that song and dance forever. As an added curiosity, during that final divorce he'd shacked up with an heiress of the Gamble, the second half of Procter & Gamble fortune. He'd planned on marrying her, no doubt to get at her money, and they'd gotten far enough along with that she'd written him into her will. As it all stands, she died. He inherited the money and promptly died himself before he had a chance to amend his will, which set my great grandmother as his beneficiary, and he ended being good for something. So there you go. We weren't married in the first place, but living as such. I got pregnant at 20. I'd been with the guy a month. I was told at 15 that I could never have kids and I'd always been reckless and didn't use contraception. So I was like, right, I'm keeping this baby. I told him I was moving to a different country to be near my mum. He could stay or come with, choose to have contact with the kid or not. I even said I wouldn't go after him for child support. A month after I had the kid, he arrived in my new home country and we began living together. We had been together under a year at this point. Well, we decided we would like another kid eventually, and I assumed it would take a long time. I was wrong. When my daughter was 15 months old, I had my second daughter. We had never had time to work on our relationship, or even really date. We fought all the time. I got postpartum depression and just picked fights over everything. So when my youngest was about to turn 1, we separated. We barely spoke at all. Just a hi when I dropped the kids off for visitation. He had an awful girlfriend who hated my kids, so he saw them less and less. I was so mad at him. 2 years down the track, I got really ill with an infected gallbladder and pancreatitis. I was in hospital for 2 weeks. I woke up from my gallbladder surgery and had this sudden realization that I loved him and wanted him in my life. I messaged him and told him my feelings, but that I understood he had a girlfriend. I understood if he hated me and would like to just be friends. He messaged me back saying he didn't hate me, but he did have a girlfriend, so that's all he was going to say. I was sad, but I understood. He had moved on. The next day he texted me and told me he had broken up with her, and when were the kids and I going to be able to come for a visit. We started back slow, just all visiting together, then eventually staying the night. 5 years ago we moved back in together and he proposed. I have worked hard on myself, quit drinking and got help for my mental health. He has worked hard on himself too. We are super strong now. We have just gone through a year of living in a caravan with the kids, the dog, the cat, and a lizard, while we build our house, and we have hardly fought at all. Nowadays when we disagree we talk about it, instead of me being a bitch and going psycho. I love him so much and can see being together forever. I've posted this before, but I think it counts here. My great grandfather was convicted of murder and executed in Kentucky. He had 3 kids at the time. Then my great grandmother moved to Oklahoma and remarried, and had 2 more kids. My grandfather was one of the first 3 kids. One of my cousins I'm pretty close with grandfather is one of the Oklahoma kids, But a long-standing family legend is that great-grandpappy Jim actually was never executed and got to Oklahoma and remarried his widow. So a few years ago our grandfathers had genetic testing done and they're full siblings. I'm not sure what company they used, 23andMe or some other. So apparently my great-grandfather did indeed kill a man, escape execution somehow, and remarried his own widow. He lived to be 98. I met him once when I was 2. My girlfriend's parents have divorced twice and are currently married. He cheated on her about 6 times. Terrible relationship. She genuinely loves him and he loves her, but they do not get along at all. They're simply together because she can't be with anyone else. Sex, and for their children. My girlfriend's 18 and is planning on moving out soon. We predict that as soon as she does, they'll go their separate ways since she's the last one left at the house. Bro, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.